Hello and welcome to my channel. This is Ronald here to talk about the books that I read between July and December of 2024. There are a few warnings I want to give before we get into the video. The first is a spoiler warning. The second is a dog warning. You can probably already hear them, but if you hear noises in the background, it's the dogs. So with that being said, let's get into the video. So the first book I read in the month of July was Flashpoint. I did 2 videos over this book, so I'm just going to direct y'all to go watch those videos. Just know I gave the book a 4 out of 5. The other 2 books that I read in the fall were Symphony of Secrets and Wild Women and the Blues. Both of these were books that we read for book club. Symphony of Secrets was my pick for book club. Wild Women and the Blues was somebody else's pick for book club, but it's a book that I had been wanting to read. So I'm going to talk about them together because they have similar storylines and they take place during similar time periods. And even the way that they're set up is very similar. So I'm going to talk about them together, right? Symphony of Secrets follows Dr. Bern Hendricks, who is a professor of music in North Carolina. He gets flown out to New York by this foundation called the Delaney Foundation because they found this rare symphony by their namesake Frederick Delaney, who is this famous composer back in the 20s. They found like his final symphony that like is infamous because the symphony that he put out was supposed to be a comeback, but it was terrible. But they think they found the original version of the symphony, so they want Bern to come up there and to like decode it and stuff because he worked on decoding some previous stuff for them, right? That's what Symphony of Secrets is about, right? And then Wild Women in the Blues is about this college student named Sawyer. He's trying to finish up his dissertation for his PhD, and he discovers this reel of film in his grandma's attic that he thinks might be an old lost Oscar Micheaux film, right? So if you don't know who Oscar Micheaux is, he's like a black filmmaker from back in like the 20s and the 1910s, and yeah, he's basically like the original Tyler Perry. Go look him up. Go look into him. He has a very fascinating story. But yeah, so he discovers this reel of film and he thinks it might be an old Oscar Micheaux film. So the lady that's in the film, her name is Honorée Daucourt, she's still alive. So he's gonna go to Chicago to talk to her and to find out like what he can find out. But he discovers that Honorée is not exactly willing to be open about what went down, so you gotta kind of like pry it out of her, right? So that's what the 2 books are about, right? So now we're gonna get into spoiler territory because like I said, these books are set up pretty similarly, and Bern and Sawyer are not the only protagonists in their books. So in Symphony of Secrets and Wild Women in the Blues, there's the perspectives that take place in the present. The present is Bern and Sawyer, and then in the past. The past takes place in the 20s. Symphony of Secrets has some of it take place in like the late 1910s, but that's really only like towards the early part of the book. Majority of the past takes place in the 20s. In Symphony of Secrets, the past perspectives are told through Frederick Delaney and Josephine Reed, and the past in Wild Women in the Blues takes place through the perspective of Honorée Daucourt, right? Symphony of Secrets, we've already established that Frederick Delaney is the composer that Bern is decoding, right? Josephine Reed, an autistic black woman in the 1920s who was very like interested in music, and she played a huge, very huge part in Delaney's compositions, and she never got her credit. So in the book, we learn about what went down in the past through their perspectives, and in the present, Bern is discovering what he can about what went down in the past. Wild Women in the Blues, like I said, the past takes place through the perspective of Honorée Daucourt, so we get an understanding of what went down in the past, and then Sawyer in the present is trying to pry out of her what went down in the past, right? So I gave Symphony of Secrets a 5, and I gave Wild Women in the Blues a 4. Both of these books were great. Let me start off by saying that. Both of these books were great books. Symphony of Secrets I enjoyed. I enjoyed the characters, I enjoyed the protagonists, I enjoyed the story. Well, I didn't enjoy all the protagonists. I hated Frederick Delaney. And you want to know what's crazy? When we talked about the book in book club, the other book club members, they were like, oh, we liked him at first, but then as the story went on, we hated him. I hated him from the beginning. From the moment we met him, he just had this attitude of like, I'm better than everybody else and I'm gonna be a star and da-da-da this and da-da-da that. But he didn't have the skills to match. And so like just his attitude, I didn't like him. And as the story progressed, I just disliked him more, but I never liked him. But I loved Josephine. I really enjoyed Burn. And there's this side character named Ebony in the present. Ebony is working with Burn, and I liked her too. I I liked all the black characters. Today is July 29th. I've started reading Brendan Slocum's Symphony of Secrets, and I like it so far. The only thing I can say, like, really is just like, I'm not gonna say I'm struggling, but like the music terms, I don't know, because when I read, like, I picture stuff and I try to hear stuff, and so because I'm not familiar with these music terms, I'm not really able to hear what he's trying to describe. But and sometimes he'll explain it, and sometimes he's wrong, and that's fine. But I do like the book so far, and I'm interested to see like how it's gonna play out. So today is August 7th. I wanted to come talk about Symphony of Secrets, right? Because I've been reading it, and I've gotten to the part where we've learned about Josephine Reed, and I'm kind of starting to get the feeling that Josephine is the actual composer of all this music, not Freddie. At first, I thought the storyline was that Freddie was like actually a black man who had been passing for white. It's actually starting to look like he's a white man who stole from a black woman and got famous off her name. And I'm just ready to see if I'm right or not. So let's see. Today is September 16th, and all I can say is justice for Josephine, right? Like, Freddie done stole this lady music. Well, no, he didn't steal it. First of all, before we even get into it, Josephine is a black woman from North Carolina, right? She came to New York pursuing music, and an autistic black woman. Freddie knows this, but still took her in because she could teach him how to play the piano because she's really good with music, right? So this lady wrote this song called Amber in the Speedway, and this man took her song, changed the name to Bring It to the Moon, or Bring the Moon Back something, and then sold the song. And then he gonna write some more songs, and when he gets told that his songs are trash, he's confused on why his songs are trash when everybody's singing his song. And I'm like, maybe it's because that's Josephine's song, and you and Josephine don't have the same writing style because you and Josephine don't have the same skill set, because Josephine is a better musician than you are, because you was absolutely positively sucking at it. I just want some justice for Josephine. Somebody changed my girl's song back to the name she gave it, which was Amber in the Speedway. Today is September 27th, and I needed to come talk about Symphony of Secrets because all of the black people are down bad, right? So I'm getting close to the end, and all the black people in all the eras, in the past and the present, is down bad. Josephine is down bad back in the 20s. Burn and Ebony are down bad in the present. The Delaney's are like the white people. They sitting up trying to profit off of these people, and they ain't got no talent. Delaney in the past is profiting off of Josephine snatching her music, and not even his direct descendants, his great niece and nephews in the present. They had Burn kidnapped by the police, beat down by the police. They got Ebony on the run. Like, this book is stressful. It's stressful, but it's good. I can't wait to see how Josephine, Burn, and Ebony gonna resolve their situations. I really want Josephine to escape, but she messed up. We just got to see how this is gonna go for her. Based off the present, though, I don't think it's gonna look too good for her, but I'm hoping Burn and Ebony can get some justice for her in the present, because that's what we need, because we need a win, because everybody is down bad, and it's stressing me out. It's getting a little too real. It's hitting a little too close to home in the plot. So I'm on the last part. Things did not go well for Josephine. She had a sad ending. It made me sad because Josephine was my favorite character in the book. But Burn and Ebony managed to avenge her, managed to get her all of the things that she deserved. And it's bittersweet, but I'm happy about it. I'm going to finish the book. I just finished the book. I'm so glad they got justice for Josephine and got her the recognition that she deserved and got the music correctly attributed to her. Like, everybody knows who she is now. And I love it. The best way I could sum it up is the way Ebony put it when they were finally told where they found her original version of the opera, that she wrote instead of the one Freddie tried to pass off. She hid that mess in the elevator, and it had been there for a century. And when they saw the space, Ebony said, "That's my girl." And that's how I feel about Josephine in this story. Like, that's my girl. It's bittersweet because her justice comes a century later after she's not there to receive it. But it is what it is. I did enjoy this story. I thought it was phenomenal. And then Wild Women in the Blues. Today is October 27th, and I've been reading this book called Wild Women in the Blues. It's our latest book club pick. Now, ironically, this is a book I've been wanting to read all year. It's been on my reading list, like wanting to read it since February, because I discovered it around the time of the Sense and Sensibility movie. And I've been wanting to read it since then, but I just didn't have the time. And so one of the book club members was like, "I want to read this book," because it's kind of been weird. Like, the last few books we've read for book club have all been like music related books, and like they've all taken place back in the day. So we had Leaving Cecil Street, we had Symphony of Secrets, now we have this book, which is Wild Women in the Blues. And what's crazy is this book and Symphony of Secrets are like very similar books. Like, they have very similar storytelling mechanics. Like, their back in the day portions both take place around the same time in the 20s. Like, it's crazy, right? This is how you know the book is good, because I just been reading it, ain't made no type of video update about it. I'm 60% through the book. And this is the first time I'm talking about it on camera, right? But basically, it's these two protagonists, Honoree and Sawyer. Honoree is the back in the day protagonist, and then Sawyer is the present day protagonist. But Honoree is also in the present day. Present day in this book is 2015. She's about 110. And what's crazy is when I started the book, I was like, I like Honoree back in the day, but I don't really like her in the present for some reason. And Sawyer, he took kind of a little minute to like grow on me. But at this point in the book, based off what we've learned so far and like everything that's gone down, I like both of them. I like both of them. And like, it's just a lot going on. I wish Honoree wasn't so hung up on Ezekiel, but she's 19, so it is what it is. Now, Sawyer, I'm ready to see like what's gonna come next after what this reveal that we just got. This connection between him and Honoree that he didn't know about and he just found out about. I'm ready to see how this is gonna go, because this is gonna be interesting. So it is later on today, right? And I'm about 70% of the way through the book. The dude that Honoree is hung up on is Ezekiel, right? They were never officially a thing, but she liked him. He liked her. He ran off on her. Came back 3 years later, and basically he runs an automobile shop, but he's also running numbers on the side, right? This is important to the whole plot, because the whole book Ezekiel has been, "Give me a few days, it'll work out, I promise." Just making promise after promise after promise to Honoree, and I ain't seen him fulfill not one promise. This goes back to my earlier sentiment of, why doesn't Honoree just leave him alone? It's quite obvious to me that he's never going to be what she hopes and expects him to be. And the fact that he's got her so tangled up in what's going on in the book, like, it all leads back to him. It all leads back to him. But then again, she's 19, so, you know, she gonna make 19-year-old decisions. So we just made a huge discovery in the story, and honestly, I feel vindicated, because for the longest time, I've been like, I like Honoree when she was younger, but I don't really like her when she was older, when the book first started, right? I'm like, she seems so different from how she was when she was younger. And now with the revelation we just got, it makes sense. Stuff is starting to make sense. And some of the mystery and the clues that I put together are starting to make sense, because I was like, something's not adding up. And now I see, because what we were led to believe is not actually the case. I feel vindicated because I peeped this since day one. Chapter 1. So today is October 28th, and I just finished Wild Women in the Blues. I enjoyed it. It was a phenomenal book. I thought the end was going to be bittersweet, but it wasn't. However, when I got done, I still had questions. And the reason why is because, you know, back in the day, there was a mystery, right? And we got like a general understanding of what went on, but I was still had some questions, and I was still a little bit confused about what went on back in the day. But overall, I did enjoy it, and I think part of the reason why I was kind of confused, because I kind of low-key was rushing through it, because it's due back to the library today, actually. And so I was trying to get it done, but I enjoyed it. I did. There is a twist that takes place like about 3/4 of the way through the story, and I kind of already had guessed this twist very early on, because this is kind of where we get into spoiler territory, because Honoree in the present and Honoree in the past did not act the same. It wasn't a case of maturity and, you know, just time and she's gotten older. No, she was like completely different, to the point like when I was reading her in the early chapters, I'm like, these read like two different women. Like when a person has changed throughout their life, they still retain some characteristics of who they were, right? Like they still have core characteristics to their person, who they are. Honoree in the past and Honoree in the present didn't have those characteristics, right? None of those characteristics matched. And there's a reason for that. And I figured it out pretty early on. I'm not going to say why because I don't want to completely spoil the story. But yeah, just know that that was one of the things about it. That wasn't a bad thing, but I guess this was pretty early on. The reason I gave Wild Women in the Blues a 4 is because there were a lot of things that just seemed like they were kind of like not resolved. Part of me feels like the author was kind of going for a unresolved, like, because it's life, right? And everything doesn't have a nice pretty resolution. Some things just remain unresolved. Some things they're messy to resolve. I feel like she was going for a purposeful not resolving it, but it felt like the story kind of just like stopped in a way. Like it didn't feel like they were purposely left unresolved. It felt like it kind of like we had to wrap up the book, so I just stopped writing about them, kind of. One of the main examples I have is this side character, Ezekiel, who is Honoree's love interest. He basically disappeared on her after they slept together for the first time when she was like 16, right? Basically, her family was working for his family. Basically, Honoree was in love with this man. Ezekiel said he was in love with her, but then after they slept together, he basically left the next day, and she never heard from him again for like 3 years until he comes back into town, right? And so like, of course, when he comes back, she doesn't trust him because she's like, well, you just slept with me and then disappeared the next day. But like over the course of the story, it's like she goes from not trusting him to trusting him just like that. And it's like it makes sense for her character because she's still in love with him, but it's like as a reader it doesn't really flow that well, because it's like up until the moment she decides to trust him, she's not trusting him, because Honoree is in a life or death situation in the past. Like she was in the wrong place at the wrong time and she witnessed some mess that she wasn't supposed to witness. Ezekiel is involved because he's like why all of this went down and took place in the first place. So that's part of the reason she doesn't trust him, because he's involved and he has a personal interest in what happened and a personal interest in if she dies, he's protected. So that's why she doesn't trust him. So that's why I'm like, the way it's set up, we never really sure if we can trust him or not. Because he's like, oh, trust me. But we're like, but you're involved in what is life or death for her. Like, come on now. By the end of the story, we're supposed to trust him, but it doesn't really feel like we ever can. For the whole book, I was waiting on him to like do her dirty again, but that never happened. So when the book ended, I'm like, well, dang, I don't really know how to feel about your character because I never trusted you. There's another character named Bessie who plays a huge part into the story. Her storyline actually is one of the few storylines that does actually resolve itself. Honoree's storyline did have a resolution, but it's like the way it came about was so abrupt. It's like, really? And Sawyer's storyline, he has a storyline with his sister who's dead. That doesn't resolve itself, and I feel like it's meant to be left unresolved because of how it's set up and because of the feelings involved and stuff like that. But it's like I said, it just all felt like a very abrupt end. Like it felt like we didn't purposely leave them unresolved. It literally felt like, oh, I'm just gonna leave the story where it's at and I'm just gonna write a chapter to end it, and that's what it is. And that's not to say this was a terrible book. Like I said, I really enjoyed this book, but I'm just telling the truth. It felt like a lot of it got left unresolved at the end. The other issue I had with it was there's this character named Lula in the present. She's helping Sawyer, but like she feels like a plot device. The only time we ever see her is when Sawyer needs help to get to Honoree. And that's the only time we ever see her. Because then when we get to the end of the book, when we finally see her outside of like this setting, we don't know nothing about her. And like the few times we do see her outside of of work. It's like we don't really get nothing about her. The dynamic between her and Sawyer comes across as very awkward. And it's like towards the end when they're like friends, it's like it doesn't really feel earned. Their friendship doesn't feel earned because we haven't really seen them develop a friendship because most of the story she's a plot device. And like we get a little tidbit about like how her family owes Honoree's family, and that's why she's like so dedicated to taking care of her, but it's like we never get really more about that. Like I said, a lot of this felt unresolved and like felt like a lot was missing, but I still like the book. So overall, I enjoyed Symphony of Secrets. I enjoyed Wild Women in the Blues. Both of these are very music heavy books. Symphony of Secrets was written by a black author who is a violinist, so he's a for real violinist. He used a lot of musical terms in the book that I didn't really understand, but I wasn't bothered by it because it made sense that Byrne would use these musical terms because he's a huge music head. He's a professor of music. He knows all these terms and he's describing the music. I've said before that I appreciate when stories have their characters like use terms and don't explain them because it helps with lending to the credibility of the story. Like it makes sense that these characters would use these terms and not explain them because it's normal to these characters to be using these terms without explanation, right? But in the case of Symphony of Secrets, I did not mind it because it made sense for Byrne to be using these musical terms because he's describing the music that he's listening to and he's literally looking at a symphony, right? Literally looking at sheet music. It makes sense. But also the reason I appreciated it is because he was talking about how the music made him feel, which is something a reader who doesn't really know much about music and like musical terms can understand. And that's also how he wrote Josephine's perspective and how she described music. The way she described music and her system of describing music was not the way that people are used to. She had her own system and her own way of working, and I love the way that she did it and described it. I hated the way Frederick tried to normalize her system. I loved her system. It worked for her and it was beautiful. It expressed how she felt. It expressed how she heard music. It expressed so much about her character, right? And like I said, I liked how it was done in this book because like I said, it's showcasing how it makes the characters feel. And it feels authentic as opposed to like say Falcon 7 and the Lost Fleet where they're just like throwing Navy terms at us and it's like I don't understand these terms, and it's like they would try to explain it but like you still wouldn't get it, and it's not really connected to how the characters feel. It's connected to what the characters are doing, and if you don't have a visual reference for how that works, you're not going to understand what the characters are doing, and that's basically the difference, right? Now Wild Women in the Blues, they used actual music to express the time period like in the past. You could go listen to the music as you were reading. It helped with setting up the setting, right? So it was enjoyable. But Honoree is a dancer, right? So she used a lot of like dance terms and like again, she in describing these dance terms, she described how they made her feel both emotionally and physically. And it worked for the story. So those are my thoughts on Symphony of Secrets and Wild Women in the Blues. I enjoyed them both. Thank you for tuning into this video. If you liked it, give it a like, comment on the video. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, check out more content from me, and I'll see you guys next time.